Hi! In this tutorial we're going to work on adding a proper menu to our game. Right now, when we hit play, the game starts immediately, and when we hit stop, it just ends. So there's no menu, no game over screen, no instructions, no credits, nothing. Today we're going to build all of that, and for a change I'll start by showing you the final result so you can get an idea of what we're aiming for. To create this menu, we first need a new script. At the moment we have two scripts, one attached to the B, called B script, and one attached to the ground, which is the spawn controller. Now we'll add a new script and attach it to the main camera. Technically you can attach it anywhere, but I'll put it here. We'll name the script Game Controller. For this, I already prepared some code. There's quite a bit of it this time, so I'll mostly copy and paste, but we'll go through it step by step. This game controller will primarily manage different game states and render the appropriate screen depending on which state we're in. For simplicity, the game will only have two states: menu and in-game. Of course we could add more later, like a loading screen or a game over screen, but for now we'll stick with these two. In the init method, we'll switch to the menu state. The switch state method is still missing, we'll add that later. It's not critical for now. Then, in the update method, we'll determine what to render based on the current state. First, we'll grab the screen width and height. We'll need these everywhere. Then, we'll clean the canvas and retrieve a variable we still need to add: the actual game state. Let's create that now. Go to Project, Variable Sets, Game Variables. We already have apples caught and apples missed. Now we'll add a new variable for the state. Set its type to string and leave it empty for now. Back in the code, we'll retrieve this state. Initially, via the switch state method, it will have the value menu. Next, we'll build a function name dynamically by concatenating render with the current state. So if we're in menu, the function name will be render menu. If we're in game, it will be render in game. We'll then call this function using a special syntax that looks like array access, but what we're actually doing is fetching the method from the game controller using the function name we just built. Since it's a method, we'll pass self as the first parameter. After that, we'll provide two additional float values. I'll explain those later. Plus the screen width and height, since we'll need those often. Next, we'll add the switch state method. We'll just place it right below. At first glance, you might think the switch state method would simply do this. It sets the state to the new state that I want. So if I call switch state with the menu as a parameter, it just writes that value in and done. Additionally, I'll keep track of the old state. Why I do that, I'll explain in a moment. But it's not quite that simple. And here's why. We don't just want to call the render function when rendering. We also want to call something when the state changes. Let's take a simple example. If we have the menu, then we don't just want to render the menu. We might also want to start the music that belongs to the menu. When we go into the game, we want to start the music that belongs to the game. And conversely, we want to stop each when leaving that state. That means we always need some way to not only call the appropriate state function for each frame, but also provide a way to call an init and exit branch. I'll show an example for this. We take the menu and add the menu render function down here. To make it clear, this render menu function has the parameters init, exit, and width and height, which we pass from above. Whenever we just want to render, we pass init and exit as false. Otherwise, we set one of them to true. Then, in this block, if init is true, we can do something that should only happen when entering the menu. And in the exit block, we can do something that should happen when leaving the menu. And down here at the bottom, we put the code that should always run. Now it probably makes sense why we keep track of the old state, because we need to know when a state is set, what was the old state, and did we even have a change. That's why in this block we check if the old state is different from the new one. If that's the case, then we should call our function once with the exit parameter set to true. Then, after the state change, we call the render function with the init boolean set to true. This way we can build fairly complex transitions. Alright, let's just try it out now. If I press play, what happens? Basically nothing. The game runs just like before, but at least there are no errors, which is good. To see what's actually happening, I'll add a few print statements here. One for init, one for exit, and one for render. Now I'll hit start and then stop it again. Looking at the output, we can see that init was printed once, and then render shows up once per frame. Exit isn't printed at all. That makes sense because we're not switching states yet. Technically, we do switch once, right here, where we call switch state menu. But since we don't have an old state yet, it's still empty. Nothing gets triggered for the exit block. That means we'll never see exit printed until we start switching back and forth between menu and game. Before we can really start building the menu, there are a few things we need. If you remember, we saw at the beginning what the final menu should look like. It had some nice graphics like the B game title screen, once as a transparent overlay and once with a blue background. We now need to bring those into our project. First, I'll upload them. I already have the images prepared, so I'll just drag them here into the root directory. Now we have the title screen image and the transparent version. I'll also create the appropriate folders and that's done. So now, here under textures, we can see both images. But how do we actually bring them into the game? Since we're rendering with canvas, it doesn't help to drag them anywhere in the editor. There's no way to use them as elements like in the scene graph. We only want to use them in code. That means we need to load these two images via our code. We'll do this at the top in the init function. Let me add a few lines here. We'll use the loader interface with load image and as a parameter, we simply pass the full path to our texture. There's an important detail here. We also pass additional options wait until finished and flip Y. What do these do? Wait until finished makes sure that this line of code only continues once the image is fully loaded and ready to use. Flip Y is needed because textures are usually flipped vertically by default. We don't want that, since we're rendering them with canvas and want them exactly as they are. We do the same for the transparent image as well. And don't forget to use await, because these are asynchronous operations. Normally, load image would return immediately with a promise. And with await, we make the code wait for it to finish. Once that's done, we have two variables, title image and image transparent. We also need to declare a few variables in the controller for them. I'll move those over. Now we can already render them. Let's do that right here in the render section. And we'll scale it to fill the entire width and height of the screen. I'll explain the last two parameters in a moment. For now, let's just hit play. It takes a second to load. Or maybe not? Seems like we forgot something. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. In our script, we also have a render function that writes to the canvas, and more importantly, it clears the canvas first. That means the two scripts are definitely interfering with each other. I'll remove that, and now let's hit play again. And now we can see what the game controller is rendering. Next, I'll switch to the transparent version. Much better. Now, about that 2 at the end of the function call. Let's check the documentation for draw image. As we can see here, the last parameter is the mode, which basically controls how the image should be stretched. If I set it to 0, the image will be stretched exactly to fit the screen. Otherwise, we have other options like fit or cover. Let's try all 3 modes and see the differences. If I use 0 and stretch the screen wider, it looks terrible because the image gets distorted. We definitely don't want that. Let's try 1 instead. That's not bad. It no longer distorts, but now the image becomes very small and doesn't scale up. It's better, but not ideal. Finally, let's try 2. Now we have a bit more flexibility. If I make the screen really large, it still has issues, but overall it looks the best so far. At least it doesn't shrink to a tiny size, and as long as the aspect ratio is okay, I'm happy to leave it like this for now. Next week, we'll finish it up and finalize our main menu with some more code. Stay tuned!